today, sometimes I like the randomness, as Howard also do, and that's why Howard and I actually met originally. But today we're actually going to be talking about something a bit different than hospitality and food. But anyway, we're going to end probably around hospitality and food anyway, because we're going to be talking a bit about, how to leave your phone at the door, how to go offline, the power of network, the power of community, and actually what we actually can learn from people outside our hospitality industry as well, of thinking. And actually sometimes when you're not so focusing on finding answers and actually just pause for a moment, you actually meet people that actually change your life or your direction or your thinking. So we're also going to talk about Howard's new book that's called Leave Your Phone at the Door, which goes really well with, I talked about how do you actually go offline before. And that's actually first time I've had many conversations with Howard, and really a big shout out to Kieran Bailey. I think actually he introduced us once over a cup of tea and coffee somewhere random as Farringdon. And then we just kept over the years talking. And I always walk away from conversation with Howard because he meets so many interesting people thinking about the world a different way than I did when I met him. So welcome to the show, Howard.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely pleasure to have you. So now I've already set the scene, Howard, but can you just give us like a short intro, because your journey is very long, full of wisdom, but like what is the journey that led you to launch offline? And then we'll come back to the book in a moment.
Thank you, Michael. Well, the short answer is that offline is a gathering of people, no more, no less. There's no great master plan. There's no objective. It was simply the notion that if you bring together 30, 35 different people in a room over supper, you will find in general that there's far more that connects them than separates them. And sadly, in the modern world, partly because of technology, people have a tendency to reinforce what they can do really, really well and ignore everything they can't. And I think that's a mistake. I think people should actually invite others into their lives where they see some of their imperfections and some of their weaknesses, because in a way, that's what makes us human.
And how did you end there? Because your journey comes from a totally different place, doesn't it?
Well, my journey started when I was much younger, of course, when I was in the stock market. And I went to stock market from school and worked there a number of years, built a business up. I got out because, frankly, it became so overregulated, I didn't enjoy it anymore. And besides that, I got involved in a company which I co-founded, which is now actually quite a bit bigger. It's now called Invaluable, and it's actually a platform to find information about what's being sold at auction around the world, within the world of art and collectibles and antiques and so forth. And I did that, and then beyond that, I got involved in a bunch of other activities, some involved in the art world. And offline, really, in very simple terms, was just a culmination of many things. As you said, first of all, I knew quite a few people. I'm quite a curious person. I used to read very widely. I still do, but I used to read newspapers, which people probably don't remember very well these days, magazines, periodicals, and very often I would tear articles out to read myself later in more depth. And as I do so, I would think to myself that, Michael would like this, and Kieran would like that, and Jennifer over there would like something else. And I simply tear things out and send them off to them. And the feedback was always great. It didn't have anything to do with what they were working on or their background, just things that I thought were interesting would pique their interest. And the feedback was always great. I always found that people were enthused and excited and grateful for me sending things through. And it just grew from there. Anyway, I did it probably 15 people in particular. And one person said, as he received a bundle of articles from me, because he knew I did it for other people, what's everybody else getting? And I thought, that's interesting. Why did I bring together a bunch of people over supper, share a few articles and see where it goes? And it was a great success. And I realized two things. The first thing was that the majority of people have a real appetite for information, for knowledge, for insight. Really haven't got the time or inclination to distill the vast profusion of material out there. The other thing I love, which is very interesting, is that food is a great leveler. And when you eat with people, Michael, you learn a great deal about them. And the first dinner was successful. I was asked to do it again by other people. I did another one a few months later, and it just simply grew. But I have to say that it grew without any semblance of a plan. I've simply sent an invitation out to 150 odd people on the premise that maybe 1 in 5 would accept. And it drew an extraordinarily wide-ranging bunch of people. And I didn't limit it. I wasn't interested in how much money people made. I wasn't interested in their religion, their sexuality, their age. It was of no consequence at all. But what I cared about very much was that they were givers. And they were open, and they were curious, they had to share with other people. And I have to say that having done probably, I never actually counted to be honest with you, but probably 50, 60 dinners over the years, I learned that most people have a great desire to embrace otherness. In other words, they're interested in other things, but somehow they need a bit of a shove or a nudge maybe just to move in that direction. There are so many people one comes across who are very nervous and very shy and very scared about what may go wrong. And actually, when you give them permission to be vulnerable, which is really what I did offline, suddenly you find all bets are off and people forget the fear. And I remember very, very well one particular dinner, a lady came who I didn't know. She approached me after reading an article about me in the newspaper. And she said to me that she was running quite a successful company in outsourcing, as I recall, probably turning over then 10 million, so not insignificant. She said to me, I know my business really well. It's a well-run business. We've got a senior board. We're doing our stuff. It's all fine. But she said to me, I feel very confined. I need to structure myself in different ways. And I'd love to come to a dinner, but I'm very, very cautious about this kind of thing. I said, cautious about what? She said, everything. And she said, when I first went, and I know it's because she told me after the event, when I first went, she said to me, I was scared. I was really scared. I was way out of my comfort zone. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know what they think of me, whether I had to stand up and talk about myself, whether my conversation was going to be interesting, whether they judged me for the way I was wearing my clothes. A million small and frankly spurious reasons. And I knew that. And I put on a table with people who were quite sympathetic. And anyway, the evening progressed. I remember seeing her halfway through the evening, the other end of the room, very animated, having a bottle of wine with 2 other people she'd met. I asked her about this, and she said, oh, yes, interesting you remind me. She said, halfway through the evening, I suddenly realized I forgot to be scared. I forgot. I was having just a good time. All my fears and inhibitions all slipped away. And there were many people, I feel, not quite so as an exaggerated form, were very wary, very cautious, a little bit concerned about how they come across. But when they're there, nobody much cares what colour your shoes are, whether you part your hair on the left or the right. What matters is what you share and how you embrace the occasion. And if you allow people that element of the unknown, but in a sense, it's a controlled experiment. It's not as though somehow anything scary is going to happen. It's not as though you're going to be asked to do something which is extraordinary or difficult or radical. On the contrary, what it does do is it brings together people who are maybe way outside your lane. People involved who may be more senior than you, they may be better looking, they may have particular talents, but so what? Everybody's got their own particular shtick. Everybody.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most people are much more concerned, as I said, with what may go wrong than may go right. And therefore, the idea of advancing themselves in a rather unfamiliar environment is quite challenging.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting when you meet many, stay with the CEO kind of thing, and they go to their normal events, which typical would be very industry specific, where they actually have big domain experience, and they feel very safe in that. But it's really interesting you had a CEO here that was out of their normal environment. Actually, then they have to have the courage, and actually training the muscle courage is so important, especially in the world we live in right now, where there's so much flux, and there's probably going to be more of it. Uncertainty, and the world is uncertain. So how do we actually train that actually and be willing to go and listen to other things and learn other things and just relax your brain from the automatic gear, which I thought when I was there, that was really the experience I had. I didn't even think about my own business or anything. I was just like, there were so many interesting people in the end you had talked with that evening. And as you say, you might not gain something from it straight away, but actually it's the reflection you have on yourself and what other people said that's really powerful. That was how I experienced it.
I think that's right. I think the one challenge is that we live in a very competitive world.
Yeah.
And people are all too often comparing themselves with others, comparing themselves with their past performance, how well they did something 5 years ago or 12 years ago. All which I understand to a degree, but the problem in a way is it gets in the way of the important stuff. And the important stuff is really about how you actually project yourself. And I think the most important thing of all is actually to be human.
Yeah.
And being human comes with all kinds of chinks and grooves and bits falling off the edge, because life is not quite as precise and exacting as one would like. I think the other thing to say is that people's pursuit of excellence can be very destructive. People are always striving for more or better or quicker. And that, in my mind, is not actually advantageous. Obviously, one wants to do well and one wants to aspire to better things, but I think sometimes there's a bit too much of an edge to it. And I think the human factor gets lost a little bit. It's not difficult somehow to smile at somebody or wave to them or say thank you.
Yeah.
These are not complicated procedures, but people don't do them. It's almost as though somehow to do so is an indication that I'm either a bit weak, I'm not concentrating on the matter at hand, I'm prioritizing things which are not terribly important. And actually, I think to myself, no, it's incredibly important. Because I think you see, moreover, in a world dominated by AI and robots and whatever, the ability to communicate face-to-face will become even more important. And what's very troubling is the fact that a lot of young people and old people, I have to say, it's not confined to youth alone, but they are more prevalent, is the fact that the inability to speak face-to-face, the inability to actually engage in any kind of conversation is regarded as somehow a problem. I remember reading something quite recently about young people in America, I think on a university campus, particularly with girls rather than boys, where they have their phone in their hand permanently. And the reason they do that is because if they see somebody coming towards them who they don't know, who may ask them a question they can't answer straightforwardly, they can put their phone to their ear and have an imaginary conversation with somebody they wouldn't know at all, or maybe text random numbers on their phone to give the impression they're so busy they can't talk to that person at all. Now, how sad is that in a way? That you don't even have the ability to say, good morning.
Or you're scared.
You're scared. Of course you're scared. Now, not everybody. Some people are great. I have very interesting experience just about a month ago on the tube. I was traveling probably late morning, compartment was fairly empty, and the doors open and 25 kids all pile on with a couple of teachers in tow. And they were probably all about 11, 12, 13 maybe. There was a spare chair next to me, a spare seat. And this little Indian boy sits down, puts his bag on the floor. He turns to me, looks me in the eye and asks, how's your day been so far? Which I thought to myself, well, fine, but, how about you? He said, wonderful. He said, we're coming back from a school trip. They'd just been to the Globe. I'm not sure if you're familiar.
Yeah, the theatre.
So the Globe Theatre, for anybody listening who's not familiar, is based upon the original Elizabethan theatre created in Shakespeare's time.
Yeah.
And although it was reconstructed 50-odd years ago, it's sort of a remarkable example of how theatre was built and portrayed. And it's wonderful. You go there and you can see the construction and the layout and the history behind it. And we chatted about that for probably 3 or 4 minutes, a little bit about Shakespeare. Not that he knew very much about Shakespeare, in fairness. And then they went off, changed lines. But in that 3 or 4 minute spell, Michael, I thought to myself, here is hope for humanity. Here is not a kid who instinctively sits down, looks at his phone, scrolls through messages and so forth, or looks at the floor or the ceiling. He simply turned to me as in the conversation for 12, it wasn't a very deep conversation, but he asked. And that alone, I felt, something that deserves a little respect from me towards him. And to what extent other people listening on the show or elsewhere, show it to those who maybe are more junior or that much older, or people who look a bit different, or strange name, or whatever it may be. The truth of the matter is, what he did, I grant he's probably uncommon as a kid of that age to be quite so open and confident to ask me the question, so I was a stranger on the train, but it was nevertheless quite revealing. It's not difficult to say, hello, or where are you going, or what book are you reading, or what you're eating.
Yeah.
These are very simple steps to build some kind of rapport. And yet the technology takes away the spontaneity. The technology causes people to either check with somebody else first or what the group did last time. Not good news at all. You need to live your life, in a sense, as an individual rather than being consumed by what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We're going to come back to it. So I thought it was really interesting what you said again. Like you talked about courage. Now we're talking about being curious. So is there actually now, as things has evolved, Howard, is the mission with the offline platform? Are you continue doing dinner at some point? I know you paused it for at some point, but is there like a bigger mission now as you found out this actually gives huge values to people and yourself, of course?
Well, I think on one level, the book does that for me. I mean, obviously, the book enabled me to share a few observations, which perhaps I didn't share at the events I hosted. I can host an event anytime. I can host an event tomorrow morning if you ask me to. It's not difficult in that sense. I think that for me, the reason I stopped was because I grew a little bit weary of what I call the back end. The planning, the organization, following up, dealing with people, getting confirmations, making sure they're all paid. And then on top of that, at the last minute, always getting some extremely difficult dietary requests. And the events themselves were fine. Events themselves were lots of fun. They were sold out, all kinds of interesting people there. But I just felt it needed a bit of a refresh. And I obviously, due to COVID, couldn't host dinners for over 2 years. And I started again in May 22. I did 5 more dinners that year. All great. The last one was in December of that year. And in February 23, Frederick and I went away on a big trip to South America. And I just felt somehow that was really, in a way, a moment to reflect. Did I want to carry on with the dinners when I got back? And the answer was that no, not at that particular point. I wanted to get the book done. There were other things I was doing in my life as well. And I just felt somehow that I wanted to give it a bit of a shake up. Just tweak it here and there. I had one or two other ideas about how I would develop the offline concept, but with a small group of executives, which would be quite interesting. And actually, the idea I haven't shared with anybody else before, so you get first dibs. But the idea was that you invite 6 people, all senior leaders in whatever capacity, don't be hospitality, be anything you like. And I would pose them beforehand 6 questions. Business, pleasure, recommended, could do better, virtues, and vices. 3 lines, short answers. They shared that with me beforehand, and obviously then at the lunch or the dinner, I would have those in front of me, and I would go round the table and say, right, okay, virtues. Okay, you say you are, I don't know, visiting an old people's home every Saturday afternoon. Great, wonderful. You are somebody who is extremely kind. And you go around the table, see how people pick up on different themes, ideas, vulnerabilities, weaknesses, shared interests, and so forth. But in a way, I like the idea that you don't know any of the other 6 people, or 5 people for that matter. And the questions are not designed to somehow trip you up. What they're designed to do, in a way, is to enlighten people about your life, what moves you, what motivates you, who you're inspired by, what books you read, what you love to see again. And I think, in a way, the difficult thing is in the business world, there is a fear that somehow you may be inappropriate, or you may not use the right language, or you maybe are behind the curve, or you're past your sell-by date, or your conversation is not very relevant, all of which may be true. That's not enough of a reason not to get together with other people of a similar nature. So I like the idea of, in a way, celebrating randomness and serendipity wherever possible. That's one way I could do it. And I'd probably get different companies to sponsor it or pay for people to attend. But in a way, it's an opportunity for them to share their own outreach, who they are, what kind of leadership they represent, how they engage with people who are unfamiliar, who maybe express views they don't agree with themselves. But again, over a lunch, in a slightly different way, to give you an idea, I suppose, of the offline mantra, I thought to myself, maybe what I would do, choose a lovely venue, private room somewhere. They come, they paid, all set to go. The film, the video starts, And actually they discover that the dinner is not dinner at all. Actually, what you have in front of you is a huge platter of fruit. That's all you've got to eat. Now, what's interesting about that is, first of all, people's reaction. Somehow I thought I was coming, I'm a CEO of X or Y, and I thought there'd be somehow an event of some consequence, and you'll give me fruit. It's one thing. How do you respond to things which maybe are not quite what you expect? And how do you do so in public with people you don't know? Then, okay, well, who just grabs fruit and doesn't share with everybody else? Who eats all the plums without offering somebody else one first? Who eats with juice swishing in a direction? Who has a knife and is very precise and cutting it up? Very interesting to learn in a very small way how people behave. And I like the idea in a sense that you can bring people together where you're not quite sure of the conversation, you're not even sure what the food may be. And it may be incredibly interesting. It could be enlightening. It could be fascinating on many levels. But I think the food, because in a way it's tactile, in a way, when you eat it with fruit, generally use your hands. Some people just some cutting it up, which is a bit strange to me, but there we go. But I like the idea there's that physicality involved. And at the offline dinners, again, that tactile element was always present. People were coming and they were shaking hands and they were kissing and they were hugging and they were waving and they were whatever it was. But somehow there was movement, there was activity. It wasn't people sitting there inanimate waiting for their moment to strike. The odd person, I'm sure. But in the vast majority of cases, there was a little bit of intrigue. People weren't quite sure what to expect.
Yeah.
And I like that. I think in a way, the problem in the modern world is it's too prescriptive.
Yeah.
People know what you're going to do. Why? Because you've probably sent notes on social media 10 times already, and therefore, in this way, it's no surprise.
Did the book take you from, as well, writing the book gave you more clarity about, I need to do something else. It's quite interesting when you scale down, gatherings, they actually become more valuable often for people. Then the bigger the gathering, the harder it is sometimes to extract value. The smaller you make the gathering, the more value you take from it, I've heard as well. And I experienced that as well.
Yeah, I think it's very important to have a kind of intimacy. You want people to feel as though they're a part of something special, not as though they're lost in some vast auditorium. That's not good. And obviously, depends on what you're doing. If you're doing a huge trade event, it's a bit different. But obviously, something like this, where it was really all about the people and making them feel comfortable, allowing them to be vulnerable, sharing with them at the outset all my own weaknesses and frailties and idiosyncrasies, which was part of every life. And you have the same thing. I'm sure everybody listening has the same thing as well. But that's not a bad thing. I think to myself, in a way, I want to learn about people who are open enough and confident enough to acknowledge that they can't do certain things very well. And I think I made some comment in the book somewhere where I said you can take the world's fastest athlete, the most beautiful woman, and the finest intellect, and you will find that despite their outstanding individual attributes, their lemon souffle always collapses at the vital moment. In other words, you can be brilliant, whatever you like, but we all have our own foibles and weaknesses. That's what makes life interesting. I don't find it very appealing when people tell me how brilliant they are, how much money they've made. That really is very dull. What I want to hear about, in a sense, is all the things that kind of went wrong along the way. Who they bumped into when they took a wrong turning, for example, or where they discovered, give you a simple idea. I remember years ago going to a cinema, rushing. I was on my own, as it happens, a bit late. I get into the screen, sit down with my popcorn or whatever it may be, watching the film, thinking to myself, it just really has no bearing on what I read in the review in the newspaper. And so I realized after 10 minutes, I'm sitting in the wrong screen. But the film itself was good. I stayed where I was. It was fine. Now, I've done something similar where I went to meet somebody I didn't know, got chatting with a person I thought I was meant to be meeting, found out actually was something completely different, but the conversation was fascinating anyway. And I think obviously we then met our respective counterparts, but I stayed in touch with that person afterwards. So I think sometimes when you make a mistake or something unexpected occurs, they can often give you a surprise on the upside. And I always encourage that with offline. And offline, again, I used to have different tables. So if you have a dinner of, let's say, 35 people, there are 9 tables, well, let's say 4 tables of 9. People move around. It's very fluid. I share a few stories. People convene. Some people get very deeply engrossed in one conversation. Others flow, which is great as well. But I think what matters most of all is people feel a part of it. People feel as they've got a voice. people feel as though they fit in. So I think in the modern society, too many people feel excluded.
Do you think people are hungry on all levels, professionally and emotionally in their private life, for more community? You talked about technology in a way is blocking that out, or can be a blocker for that if you're not aware.
Yes, I think most people want to feel as though they are valued and they have a voice, and people actually, in a sense, encourage them to be part of any gathering. Too many people sadly exclude themselves by applying labels which are really not applicable. And that's also a mistake. I think you don't need necessarily come to an event with some kind of expertise, or you come because you are some authority in the given area. No, that is not important in a way. What matters most of all is what you give of yourself. And if you show a little vulnerability, you show your humanity, you show actually that what matters really is what you give and what you offer other people, they will respond in kind. It's not complicated, but I think, the fear is very much the fact that we live in a world where everything is frankly benchmarked, scrutinized, subject to peer group review, and this comparison is something which I feel becomes overwhelming for some people. And there are many ways in which one can measure success. I remember writing somewhere in the book, there's a very big difference between winning and being successful.
Yeah, I was actually just finding that space in the book because it was really interesting, and you can maybe explain yourself. But one of my big heroes is John Wooden.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so I really dived into it. So talk a bit about that, because it's really interesting. You talk about it in the book. You talk about what is success in principle and how people measure success.
Yeah, look, I think success must be measured in lots of different ways. Depends on your starting point. If you're starting, at 0, actually 8% is actually rather good. Now, it would be wonderful you get to 100% in due course, but that's not really feasible and realistic.
No.
I think it's a question of proportion. I'm very, very aware of the fact that I am reliably inept at most things. So I don't judge people for their own competence or incompetence. There are some things I don't like or don't agree with, but that's not quite the same thing. And I think that, the point I made there really was that winning by its very nature is much more adversarial. For every winner, there's a loser. Success is a much more inclusive activity. Success tends to involve other people, and it tends to be ongoing. You can be successful over a period of many, many years. Normally you win at a game, a deal, a match, whatever. But in a sense, it's over.
Yeah. Then it's forgotten, actually. Yeah. There's a small moment of...
Yeah, that's right. It may be very important, maybe very powerful at that moment, but it doesn't go much further. Success, in a way, is one of those things where it just rolls on. And success can emerge a year or two later, depending on how you measure it. But I just feel somehow that the idea that one must always be the first among everybody is also a mistake. I just feel that, if you need to almost reinforce your sense of self-importance and your sense of authority and not listen to people, not invite other opinions, not recognize that you could be wrong. There's a very interesting guy, I know you've come across him, called Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio founded a company called Bridgewater, and Bridgewater is a huge asset management company. Yeah,
huge successful business,
The one thing I can tell you about Ray Dalio, which is interesting to me, forget his investment strategy, which may be very successful, he said that if his people, as in his teams and whatever their level, are not criticizing him, they're not doing their job properly. It's interesting. He says that as a leader, as the creator of a multi-billion-dollar business. If people are not criticizing me, they're not, in a way, I expect it. I want it. I want to hear what I could do better, where I went wrong. Now, I don't know how many people actually listening on this podcast will say, saying, oh yeah, I do that as well. I invite my junior members or the intern, whatever, sit around, have a cup of tea with me and tell me what I cocked up, what didn't go according to plan. It takes a brave man to say, saying, not only will I listen to you knocking something I've done or something you didn't appreciate or like, but I will then do something about it. Now, it may be a very small thing, But I just think in the act of doing it, you just change the dynamic altogether. And I just think, if you are only able to somehow look at the world from your own perspective, very difficult to look at the world through the eyes of other people. I mean, I have the same problem myself. I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah, we all struggle.
Yeah. But nobody has all the right answers all the time. And I think a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of humanity, a little bit of kindness, a little bit of consideration actually goes a lot further than you think. A lot further than you think. And John Wooden, as you mentioned before, very much subscribes to that theory. Obviously, he was a immensely successful basketball coach. Was it basketball? I think it was
basketball.
In the US.
Well, 12 titles in the college basketball.
Over something like 50 years. Extraordinary, you know. And he would always say, yes, we're competitors. We play to win.
Yeah.
But we do so with one eye on our conduct and the way in which we treat our opponents. That's just somewhere in the book. You're
I can just phrase it. Success is like character. Winning is reputation. Your reputation is what you perceive to be. Your character is who you really are.
Yes.
So he comes back to what you are thinking, and also when I see you've interviewed people here on the podcast where they are continuously successful, you think they're winning decades after decades. But actually the reason they get to that is because they're very focusing on their own character and the kindness, of course, within that, not from a greed point of view, but really what kind of character they're building and what kind of character is their organization building. How is that actually giving back as well?
I think that's right. I think, look, there are many people who are leaders who are actually quite narrow. They're very good at one or two things. Mm-hmm. But if you take them out of that comfort zone, they start to struggle. They start to flounder a little bit. Obviously, they have a very expert team around them. But as leaders, I think it's really, really important to show vulnerability. That's how, in a sense, you get people to believe in you. I don't feel somehow the idea that you are some kind of latter-day warrior, you are championing every cause and you are marching through is actually helpful. People need to feel as though they're actually with you on the journey. And when you're marching off into the distance, they're not with you. They're behind you, they're not with you. And that's a bit of a difference to me. And I just think to myself, in business, look, there are many people who are successful in business because they're opportunists. So they recognize opportunity, they're able to run with it and become successful, which is great. But I think that at the same time, you need to recognize that no business will succeed long-term without its people. Mm. You've got the best systems in the world, Michael, the best technology, AI, all the rest of it. But without people, you lose all the juice. It becomes very dry and becomes very kind of, I feel rather laboured. It doesn't have that kind of flow, which I think to myself is very much a part of offline. Offline wasn't really designed in that sense to actually do anything at all. People would say, well, what's the objective? I don't know. Is there an objective? I don't. Somebody put to me very, very well many years ago. Somebody came to dinner a few times. She said to me, one of the reasons it works so well is simply because there's no agenda, there's no outcome. Mm. Just bring together 30 people in a room, give them permission to be vulnerable, and all bets are off.
How do you then, because it's really interesting, we ended here, Howard, I was not planning, but like character is like a really important thing in the world we live in. Like that we see some extreme behaviors in the world, or some would think that's normal behavior, and then we see, kindness as well. But it's like, how do you actually build the right character to become the leader of the future? Because I think character is really, we all individuals have a responsibility of making the world a better place. And I think what really happened at Offline, I was there, it was really the best of what the world can be. You bring humanity into the game, human talks and have random conversation, which is the human bit. But how do we actually build character and how do we become aware about our own character from your life experience?
I think it's first of all, there's self-realization, who and what you are. And obviously that's not an instant answer. I couldn't sit here and say, well, this is the definitive path you follow. I don't think it's the kind of thing which can be necessarily coached. I think either you have a natural instinct that way or you don't. Some people also can refine those instincts. Some people can build, they have different levels of expertise. But I think some people naturally have a great sense of humor. For example, some people naturally have a great ear for music. It's not as though something you could theoretically go away and train how to do it better. But I think the ability to converse and to communicate is not saying going to be coached. I know that there is a course, probably lots of courses on that kind of subject elsewhere, but I think to myself, it should be instinctive. It should be something which is within you. Now, there may be certain catalysts or triggers which may bring it out. Certain company you feel warmer, or you feel more engaged, or you feel a part of the conversation, or simply you enjoy the people and what they represent, which is all fine as well. But I just think to myself that I can speak from my own experience. I have found that actually when you apply too many rules and too many boundaries, you limit yourself. And I like the idea that I'm forced to slightly think on my feet. I'm forced to improvise. I'm forced to find a different solution, or I'm forced to find some way to get myself out of a difficult situation. Now, again, most things are fairly routine. I'm not suggesting that somehow one does something very radical or dramatic, far from it. But I think you do never need to do things which are going to stretch you and which are going to challenge you and which actually may reinforce the fact that maybe you're not quite as good as you thought you were. Or other people are better, or maybe you were great 20 years ago, not so great now. That's not a bad thing either. But I think, people need to be a little kinder to themselves. I don't feel somehow, just because you read the headline news about how much money people have made, that somehow that represents a successful life. That represents a successful life in making money, but that alone actually, to me, is not a particularly attractive quality. You can do great things with that money in due course, whether you have a foundation or you get involved in things privately, which is great. But I just think to myself, all the while, the human factor is critical. Can you bring people inside your tent naturally, freely, without some inducement, without sense of a fear? Not everybody is able to do that. Now, I used to go to a lot of events, I'm sure you did as well, where everything was very, very prescriptive.
Yeah.
And everything was very organized. I mentioned somewhere in the book, I did an event, a corporate event, for a company called Salesforce. They're a big technology company. Anyway, they want to get close to their clientele without selling anything. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll curate a dinner for you. I'll invite 20 people on my side. People make the party swing. You invite 20 people on your side. Management, clients, suppliers, whatever it may be. And they had basically extra people there. I mean, I remember that Goldman Sachs was one of their clients, GVC, one of the big betting platforms. I remember Nielsen. But one thing I remember very well was one of their clients was, in fact, The Economist and the magazine. And the marketing director was invited, and I became quite friendly with him after. He said, to be honest with you, when they invited me, I had no idea what offline was all about. But they asked me, was their guest? I was free that evening. I just said yes. He said, you've got to understand, he said, I go to a lot of major events, all full of the great and the good and very stimulating and interesting and so forth. But he said, there are no surprises. 1 year to the next, there are senior people from the major banks or the major marketing agencies or people in government, whatever, all fine. He said it's all choreographed, however, into its life. There's no surprise. There's no sense of the unknown. He said, I show up at the offline dinner, little milling around for dinner. He said that he eventually gets to his table and he discovers that the fellow on his left is running a hedge fund. The lady on his right, he says she was a piano teacher. The fellow opposite me on the other side of the table, he said he was running a dog walking business. He said nobody cared about my role at the Economist. Nobody cared how much money I made, who I knew, my status. I should find out what kind of man I was, what my passions were, that I was interested and animated by. He said it was so liberating and refreshing. He came back independently many times and brought other people with him. So it was interesting to me that somehow that there is a recognition that in the corporate environment in particular, the fear of not being seen as professional, the fear of not being rigorous and upstanding.
There's a code almost. Like,
yes,
this is
and
how
it
we
dominates everything. And I think to myself, it's a big mistake. And I like the idea, that we said in the program it was going to be A, B, and C on the panel. Actually, we changed the mind. It's D, E, and F. I think that's so wonderful.
But I guess that comes in any industry. We have a way of it. So what because really interesting, because lots of the conversation that's been on the podcast the last probably 18 months, we have arrived at this subject a couple of times. Have we actually lost, in hospitality, have we lost the art of hospitality? So the ability to make people feel welcome, give them this, break, respite from the crazy world and technology. But what is your view, as you visit a lot of hospitality businesses, and do you think hospitality plays a role in this? Do we have a big role in making the world more human now as an industry?
I think hospitality is a big word, and I think it needs to be defined probably a bit more precisely. I mean, it's like talking about something like wealth management. Well, it means everything and nothing.
Yeah.
I think that if you are involved in the business of food, and you are in the business of gathering people together, I think that in a way one can become very, very constrained by the idea it's got to meet a certain level of perfection. And I don't think that's very important. I think what matters most of all, if you're in hospitality, a warm welcome, a big smile, the sense somehow people are thrilled to see you, not that you're somewhere on the list and marked off. People want to see you, want to find. I think, you see, in many cases, small things make a big difference. You don't need some grand gesture. You don't need to have some extraordinarily unusual venue. People go to often remarkable lengths to find somehow a venue which nobody's ever been to before. It's incredibly difficult to get to. It's only available 3 weeks of the year. Nothing wrong there with that. But I think sometimes on a very prosaic basis, if you said, actually, we were going to do a venue A, B, and C, changed our mind, we're doing it in my kitchen. Yeah. And we'll push up the sofa from the more room over here, and we'll snack stuff in the kids' bedroom. All fine. And I think that hospitality is about really the way you make people feel. That's it, really. There's no great mystique in my view. I'm not hugely impressed with all kinds of, complicated menus and fancy venues and the display. I mean, everything has its place, of course. But I think what matters is that you make people feel as though they are valued, they have a voice, and they fit in. That's it. Which cocktail you get and where you sit isn't terribly important. If everybody in the room feels as though they are there as one, those inhibitions don't slip away. It's in a sense the idea that somebody there next to you is smarter, cleverer, better looking, whatever it may be, and that's going to put you at a disadvantage. No, I don't think so at all. That's in a sense a kind of it's like a self-inflicted wound.
So we have a role to play in, maybe in that moment, to make people feel something, but it could be a very small thing. And I think actually that leads very good to another question, because I think lots of people have asked me, so how do I build my network and how do I become a better networker as well? Because I think everybody needs a network, because it's not how to, in principle. Often you solve problems in business or in life, so it's who you know, and then you of course need to ask the right questions when you reach out to them. But how do I get better? Because you talked about the boy. That was really interesting. He's already a natural network, I would say. He has the courage to ask, first of all. But how do I start actually not being scared? So when I see somebody take up my phone and then have imaginary conversation, you said, how do I become a better network? And how do I not be scared of that on the unknown?
I think that networking is a word which has all the wrong connotations for people. And I think in a way, I wouldn't even use it in this context. I think the question probably want to ask is, how can I engage with people? How can I make myself attractive, appealing, where people want to have a conversation with me? The conversation may go no further than a quick 2 minutes exchange. I'm sitting next to somebody in a cafe. We happen to be eating the same pastry. It's a conversation piece.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're reading a newspaper, which I used to read 15 years ago. Again, small thing. It doesn't need to be built up into anything very major or extraordinary. Often the small things are actually the trigger which actually build to bigger things. And I just feel somehow that I wouldn't say to you there's any kind of a manifesto to follow. I think sometimes you have to follow your instinct. But I think what matters most of all, allow yourself to be wrong. Allow yourself to fail. Allow yourself to maybe be remind something different, or give it a different point of view. It's not somehow a reflection of your character. It's not as if somebody's going to look at you in a negative way. Most people don't care about that kind of thing. What they will remember is, in a sense, how you made them feel. And what you gave at that moment. And it could be very innocuous, and it could be very simple. You could simply comment on the view. an alternative way, one thing I think is quite fun, interesting, is actually go to an art gallery or a museum. You see people there, ask them whether they like a particular image. Maybe they don't. Maybe they hate it. Maybe that's also fine as well. But in a way, it's a simple methodology to open a conversation or at least break the silence without you requiring to be expert or particularly informed or an authority on the subject. I think a lot of people feel as though they need to come to a conversation with something of real value and importance to say. And that's a mistake. I talk about all kinds of nonsense sometimes I talk to people. Doesn't matter what it is, whether I'm talking about football or something I saw in the cinema. It can be very small. It can be very modest. It may not go no further. But I think, you see, the thing is that people also respond very well to small things.
Yeah.
And I often say to myself, okay, well, this morning, can I ensure I say good morning or please to 5 people?
Mm.
It may well be that 4 of them will actually pay no attention to me. One person says, they're saying, thank you so much. And suddenly a conversation starts. I'm very wary of somehow giving advice on how to talk to people because in a way it should be a natural process. I think what people need to do is drop the fear that holds them back, whereby they perceive themselves as being of a lesser quality. We all have strengths and weaknesses. Some obvious, some not so obvious. But all the while, what matters most of all, be human. Being human actually is about embracing failure and mistakes and idiosyncrasies and so forth. When you are cooking, for example, it's also you produce it absolutely right first time around. Mm. You experiment. Different ingredients, different combinations. Maybe you make something better at night than you do in the morning. Also fine. Same thing with conversation. There's no one way of doing it. There's also somebody actually following a script where you say, okay, right, here are my 3. Some people maybe do. I wouldn't recommend that. The spontaneity, living in the moment, being mindful, being present. It's not complicated. I think in a way, the one thing which I do find interesting is that in the modern world, particularly because of technology and social media, the inability to engage in a very simple way has become much more pronounced. It's not that you can't do it. It's not as if somebody said, okay, you've got to run the 100 meters on one leg. No, you have the ability to talk to people. You choose not to exercise that right. Mm. You choose to hide in the corner. You choose to actually confine your conversation to the same 3 people we took you last week and the week before that. Now, you can do what you like, but the notion that somehow it's an impossible task, I'm asking you to do something which, is going to require you to make a huge sacrifice and go away and study and maybe actually, expose yourself in different ways. No, I'm actually saying to you in that sense, go to a museum, go to a public place, go for a walk in the park, go to the library. It's not difficult. It's not as though these things are denied you. It's not as though somehow you have particular entry requirements. No. But I just think to myself, even the notion, when I walk onto the tube in the morning, in the apartment, somebody will say good morning. So nobody in particular. Somebody says, actually, down there says good morning. Or they've got an interesting accent. I think that's interesting. You're Italian, maybe, and we have a conversation. And it just flows. But I don't worry too much about things going wrong, you see. I accept things go wrong because that's life. But I don't agonize over this small stuff whereby I won't have a conversation with anybody. I won't open up an idea or even share what I'm eating. Yeah. Now, if I've got let's say, a box of chocolates, I'm on the tube, why not offer them to the person either side? Well, somebody says down here, also, that's fine too. So I think, going back to your original question of what can people do simply to communicate better? Be yourself. Be human. Recognize that actually you may judge yourself on all kinds of levels. Most people don't care.
But I love what you said. Accept and also it's okay to be wrong and not to know everything. Actually, to be, lean back and actually be comfortable of knowing nothing about the subject. Oh, I have a little trick I use sometimes, especially because when you're in airports and planes, people will be reading a book, and I said, "Oh, why are you reading that book? And what do you learn from it?"
Would you recommend it?
Would you recommend it? And then, because I love books, and then another book recommendation. Then we talk about, there's other books you've been reading. And then I talk about mine, but then at some point they ask me about my book. And then you have like this 4-minute conversation. Maybe nothing else comes out of that.
Somebody else says, by the way, I read that book and I think it was terrible. Yeah, it's also great. So I think in a way, what you're doing is you're giving people a platform in a very, very gentle way to actually respond to you. And there are all kinds of visual signs, what people wear, the way they cross their legs, who's rolling with a paper. It's all small things, nothing major, but they all give you a clue, an insight to what somebody's like. And I just think to myself, too often people hide themselves away. There's some terrible secret they may reveal, which everybody will judge them by. And, this whole notion that, if you say something inappropriate, you'll be marched out of the building by security and everybody will see it. It'll be front page news. You'll never hear the end of it. People don't watch it. People got, regular things to do with their time. And I think this is a big problem because in the modern world with the technology, there's no escape. And the one virtue of being offline, in a sense, is you can physically remove yourself. And I like the idea of somehow being, without my phone or somehow just not giving any attention to it. I think that one of the challenges one has today is, unfortunately, young people follow the example of their parents. And in many cases, the parents are even bigger culprits than the youngsters, using their phones all the time. Why? I don't know what they're doing. Is there breaking news? Has the Pope just died? I don't know. But, most stuff you read on social media is really not very interesting, in my experience. Most of the apps have no value to your life at all. I certainly advocate the use of a dumb phone, or call it what you like. Obviously that is important. You'll be in contact with your kids, or maybe an elderly relative, or you want to check the weather, or get a map. That's absolutely fine. You can obviously text as well. But most things on social media, no. Social media, I think of myself, is really assume the role of going to the mall on a Saturday afternoon because you have nothing better to do with your time. In other words, you go there just to you could do lots of things with interest or purpose. You simply go there because you can't have anything else to do.
You want to be stimulated, I guess, as well.
Anything. Yeah. Look in the shop window, go for a coffee, meet a friend, walk round, go upstairs, go back down again, and go home. Okay, I'm simplifying a little bit, but never the idea that actually represents your kind of your go-to moment. Social media is a bit like that. Most things on social media, not that I use it, I barely use it, but what I've seen and what I've observed, most of the content is really very banal and uninteresting. And some things obviously are topical, and occasionally somebody makes a comment or you want to follow it, which I can obviously understand. It's not so much that I'm opposed to online. On the contrary, online is very good. But the reliance upon it by most people, to my mind, is extreme. This notion, whatever your level, whether you are young or old, the notion that somehow you can't live your life without it.
What has been your most significant learning, Howard, during these years with offline, writing the book, that have changed your belief, a habit, behavior?
That's a good question. I don't know if anything actually changed. I think it's probably reinforced some of my thoughts that actually humans are social animals. That's the way we're wired. And I think the desire to communicate, sight, touch, the physical dimension has always been there and always will. Whatever is the future, long after we're gone, the technology no doubt will evolve and there'll be new iterations, which is incredibly life-affirming. But I think as a human, I want to feel as though somehow I'm living a real life. And social media and online isn't really real life as I would perceive it. It's in a way a cocoon. You protect yourself from the realities. Okay, you can create that in any guise you like, whether you want to listen to great music or because art, you can find your level. But I just think to myself, social media has been very damaging. I don't think there's any one moment where I thought to myself, oh my God, yes, this is like a transformative idea. No, I think it was a slow burn. I realized over time, actually, the technology was becoming challenging, but the offline dinner wasn't really created as an antidote to technology at all. That just grew because technology over the last 15 years became so dominant. Originally, the idea was bring together people who are different but the same, and let's find out where, in fact, the best points of convergence lie. That was it. So I think for me, there was no signal whereby I thought, oh my God, yes, this is going to change my path or the direction, or no, that wasn't the case at all. It was really an affirmation as time went by that what I sensed in my bones was happening for these people together needs to be done with far more frequency. And the dinner was a very effective way to do so. And the other things I used to find at the dinners, I used to share articles there as well, but I also used to do quizzes. People think, quiz? What are you doing a quiz for? How so, that's a bit sort of lame and a bit kind of weak. I mean, quizzes were fantastic. I can tell you, I did a number of quizzes, different themes, different subjects. It's fascinating to watch how people engage suddenly with the group. They want to participate. They want to offer their opinion. Maybe you're pretty wrong, but that doesn't matter. Okay, you'll either. And then you see the competition between different tables.
Yeah.
Great. Now, there was no prize at the end of it. I really couldn't care less about that kind of thing. But watching how people displayed their attributes, their personalities, was it was eye-opening in all kinds of different ways. And equally, there were many occasions I remember at offline dinner where I used to speak at different stages over the course of the evening. I can remember 2 or 3 occasions I didn't bother with the last bit. Why? People have a good time. Why interrupt? Why interfere? I mean, nobody left their evening saying, hang on, I've been shortchanged here. You speak the last bit. People didn't care. It was a great time. They were in the bar, they were changing cards, or doing whatever they were doing. But I like the idea that people had the freedom to, in a way, make their own mark on the occasion. And that's why I mix it up in terms of the individuals. And table is also not a lot of fun. Occasionally we take us together and you have a pretty good idea. Some people get on very well. I had no idea at all. That was also illuminating.
So actually also for you to say, it's okay actually just to let things go. I don't have to manage this as maybe a learning as well yourself. Like I don't have to. I'm just going to let it flow now because it flows, the energy.
Yes.
Love that. Quick one question here, and then we're wrapping up. But what is your fondest food memory in your life? That's like a moment where you think that was
fun. One memory I can remember with great affection because it was when I was a boy. I'm probably 6, 7 years ago. Before I went to school, particularly when it was dark, it was cold in the mornings. My mother would make me semolina. I loved that. It was warm. It was filling. A little sort of hint of sugar. And you kind of look at the dark outside. Somehow that bowl with steam rising. It just somehow it was immensely comforting to me, and I loved it. And she always made it. Well, always, but I mean, certainly a lot when I was a kid. That is a very fond memory. I mean, I must say, I'm not really what I would call a gourmand. I mean, I like good food, but I'm not particularly interested in terms of the mechanics of it and where it came from and so forth. But I do know that food has the remarkable ability to bring people together.
Yeah.
And I like the idea. I mean, one thing I do remember very well, which I like as well, is Ethiopian food. I don't know if you've tried it yourself, or maybe your listeners are aware. With Ethiopian food, they have basically like a flat bread, which is in a huge plate. Everybody takes the same piece of plate. It's the same piece of bread. You're all tearing, you're touching. There's sauce here. It's all a bit sticky. It's all over. But in a way, that communal element where you are physically close, you're touching hands, you're licking your lips, food's down your front, is fantastic. I love that in a way. So that's something in a slightly different way is interesting to me. If you ask me, did I have a moment where I had something so delicious that somehow I was transported? No, I don't. But what I did do is I shared in the book, I know, a couple of great stories around food where it was just the unexpected, which in a way was the energizer. The food itself, well, one case no, that's not true. In both cases, the food was great. But it was somehow the idea that something so amazing could appear such an unlikely place. And that was also fascinating in its own way. You have a notion that somehow you've got to go to some fancy restaurant for a wonderful dinner. Actually, no. What was that wonderful thing? That was why we're eating somebody's chili con carne a bowl on my lap, because that was also great. So it's also about the experience rather than actually what you ate. So a little bit of everything.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Howard. A short little advice here in the end could you give to the audience to make the world, more human? Because that's where we started. So what will you hand over to the audience? They can
I think actually what I was saying, I was actually asked this before by somebody, there's actually a phrase I use actually in the inside cover of the book. Mm-hmm. And that phrase is that real life begins beyond your screen. I think, I'm all in favor of technology. I don't listen to this, think that somehow I'm opposed to it or I'm anti. On the contrary, technology is great in all kinds of different ways. The fact that we're having this interview right now with all the equipment is about technology in action. So, of course, I'm supportive of that. I think the issue really is that the use of mobiles and other electronic devices becomes so extreme that it's actually limited people's ability to live what I would call real life with real people in real time. But that's really probably the biggest message of all. And obviously, on top of that, accept your own limitations and vulnerabilities and regard them actually as a positive, not as though somehow some terrible stain on your character. And I think the challenge one has in the modern world, is particularly relevant for younger people, is living your life on your own terms, not worrying about what everybody else thinks.
Those really, really great, Howard, because it's also about getting away from the screen to get a new perspective. But to do that, actually, you need to lean into as well. Sure. You don't have to be excellent at everything.
No,
that's not what it's about. You need to be the excellent version of yourself.
Yes,
and feel good about that.
Absolutely right.
Beautiful place to end the conversation. Where can people, of course, get the book and connect with you if they want to know more about your journey offline?
Well, the best way to actually find out about the book is probably look at my profile on LinkedIn, which has got background and all kinds of video clips I did and interviews I've done as well, some which I relate to in the book. There's also a platform called Linktree, which is linktr.ee, some modern manifestation / Howard Lewis offline. That has all kinds of means of buying the book. There are interviews I've done with other people on podcasts and so forth, obviously in conjunction with your own. So that's probably the best way. Other than that, my publisher's radiusbookgroup.com, the book Leave Your Phone at the Door will be on there as well. So I think that's probably a good start. Anybody else really wants to find the book, give me a shout and I'll bring a copy. And once you've got it, I'll sign it for you and then we can eat and we can share and we can learn a few things along the way. You may actually challenge me about things which actually you didn't agree with in the book, which is also fine, because ultimately I like the idea that somehow we are all the same, just a bit different.
Love it. Thank you, Howard, for coming. Power and energy on the journey ahead, on the mission to make the world a bit more offline.
Pleasure.